Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Doug, are there any public speakers?
We have one public speaker, sir, Murray Bowden.
Afternoon. I want to talk about the fiscal impact of the red box at the Mount Kisco Railroad crossing. It's absolutely wrong, according to the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. One doesn't use red because colorblind people can't do it. But what it indicates is the inability of the president of Metro North to understand his responsibilities and his requirements of his job. They've ordered the wrong railroad cars. They are still ordering married pair instead of open cars of 5 units and causing you enormous loss of seats, wasted equipment. But I can't get them on that one. But it is so wrong what they did at Mount Kisco as to require his prompt replacement. Doesn't understand blocking the box is a white rectangular box with cross hatches, which is legally enforceable, which you have all over New York City. Don't block the box, 2 points. The fact that one of those roads has rails on it, it doesn't make any difference to the driver because in front of the driver is a road. That's the first step. The financial impact of that is enormous. The financial impact of buying the wrong railroad cars is enormous. This is the Finance Committee. You're in charge of saving money. Safety is impacted if you use the right lines on there, which extends to using traffic lights instead of flashing red lights, because New Jersey Light Transit has hundreds of intersections controlled by traffic lights and light rail. Light rail only means railroad cars that weigh less. And why is the driver required to figure out how much a railroad car is weighed to make a decision? This is impacted by a guy named Rick Campbell, who is in charge of the National Committee's Railroad Committee. He has a financial interest in maintaining the status quo. I know because I spoke at that Railroad Committee meeting in January in Washington, and they kind of dissed me. They said, we ain't changing because we like it. The fact that the driver doesn't like it doesn't seem to matter to them. You have the opportunity to require
Mr. Bowden,
traffic lights.
could you please conclude your remarks? You're running out of time.
My remarks went out in email to more than 80 blind copies. Nobody's disputing what I'm saying. All they're telling me is the fix is in. It's your responsibility and your opportunity to make things a little better. I'll be here on Wednesday at the Safety Committee to repeat the same thing.
Thank you, Mr. Bowden. That concludes the public comments.
Thank you, Doug. Next, we have the approval of the July 25th minutes. And may I have a motion, please? Second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, they're approved. Minutes approved. Doug, can you now take us through the work plan?
Yeah, thanks. We do not have any changes to the work plan. So I guess next is Budget Watch. The Budget Watch highlights for September, we're going to talk about financial results and operational results through August and subsidy results through September. This is the first month where we compare results against the mid-year forecast rather than the budget. Just to remind you, 2016 results as captured in the mid-year were favorable when compared with the adopted budget. Favorable changes included debt service, favorable lower energy costs, higher toll revenue, and some higher real estate transaction tax revenues. July also captured lower passenger revenue, higher pension costs, And if you recall, we made some important operational investments, which include investments to platform service and improved maintenance. So again, we're going against the mid-year forecast. Now, in a nutshell, overall, our preliminary results are basically on target with the mid-year forecast for both the month and year-to-date. Starting with passenger revenue, they're about $3.2 million below budget in September, but overall they're on target for the month. We've had some favorable bus ridership at New York City Transit and MTA Bus, offset by the impact of lower Metro North ridership because of the Park Avenue Viaduct fire. Toll revenue continues to perform well. We had positive results in September, which increased the year-to-date variance to $3.4 million, or 0.3%. Expenses in August were also mainly on target, as were year-to-date results. They're slightly favorable, $5.4 million favorable. We've had some lower costs for labor, primarily vacancies, and electric power, and we've had some timing savings with materials and contractual services. Debt service costs were favorable for the month and year-to-date, lower rates and the timing of some issuances. With subsidies, they're on target in aggregate for September and year-to-date. It's two stories. We actually have lower real estate transaction tax revenues based on lower activity. And we've had some favorable MTA aid receipts, some of that being from higher auto rental fees. Some of that appears to be timing, though. So I guess in a nutshell, again, the mid-year forecast was a favorable story from the budget, and we're right on target with that mid-year forecast overall. Any questions on Budget Watch? Okay, Pat's here to talk about Finance Watch.
Good afternoon. Finance Watch appears on page 18 of your committee materials in Director's desk this afternoon. The first transaction to discuss is the Transportation Revenue Bonds 2016C. This was a combination of bond anticipation note takeout as well as a refunding component. The band takeout was $534 million, and the refunding component was $329 million. I would just note that the refunding resulted in a net present value savings of $64.5 million, or 18.53% of the par amount of the refunded bonds. This transaction has successfully closed. It was obviously done back in July, and since we didn't have an August meeting, I'm reporting on it here. Next, we have the Hudson Rail Yards Trust Obligations Series 2016A. This was a slightly over $1 billion transaction that just closed last week. This was a very unique transaction, and proceeds of the deal will be used to retire a bond anticipation note. I would just note that most importantly, this transaction fulfills our goals to have the funding in the 5 to 9 capital program, as well as in the 10 to 14 capital program related to the leases on the Hudson Rail Yards. It was a one-of-a-kind financing for MTA, as it did capture significant value of the Hudson Rail Yards assets, as well as a favorable interest rate environment to monetize those ground leases. We did receive ratings from Kroll and Moody's. Kroll rated the transaction at A-, Moody's at A2. Because this was such a unique transaction, MTA hosted an investor information session and a tour of the Hudson Rail Yards, which we think was very important and necessary. It provided a unique credit diversification opportunity for the investment community, as was reflected in a strong market reception of the obligations. We had over $3 billion in orders for the $1 billion of obligations offered. We had 3 maturities, 30, 35, and 40 years. Each of them had a short call feature due to the unique nature of those leases. And in addition to that, the obligations were issued with an extraordinary call feature, such that if one of the parcel tenants ultimately decided to prepay their lease obligation, we would adjust the obligations outstanding by calling a like amount and defeasing them. As you can see here, the statistics are in your Finance Watch. All-in TIC of 4.28%. I would just note that that's assuming that the obligations stay out for the full term of 40 years. Quite frankly, we don't know how long they'll be outstanding because of the pace of development is a key factor in determining how long those obligations will be outstanding. But to the degree that they prepay, that TIC would come down to about 2.75%. So we'll continue to monitor that and report back as changes warrant. Turning to upcoming financings, we just last week closed on a $42.9 million MTA dedicated tax fund refunding bonds. This was a floating rate note that we decided to fix out due to market dislocation with the particular index that was associated with these bonds, and we were very pleased with that transaction. It resulted in an all-in interest cost of 2.68%. And then upcoming, we've got 5 different sub-series of FRNs that we'll be remarketing before November 1st. 2 are Transportation Revenue, and 3 are Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority, and we'll report back after those FRNs are placed into the market. Next, we have approximately a $500 million MTA Transportation Revenue refunding bond transaction that we'll be in the market with very soon, and this is intended to take advantage of the very favorable market environment that still exists for the remaining MTA Transportation Revenue bonds that are outstanding and are refundable at this time. And that transaction will be senior managed by Jeffries and Company. Turning to the fuel hedge program, since the board last met, we've had 2 successful fuel hedge. As you can see here, on July 28th, 2.9 million gallons of ULSD was purchased at a 1.502 per gallon, and that was a competitive bid with J. Aaron winning the bid. On August 24th, a similar 2.9 million gallon hedge was won by Macquarie Group at an all-in price of $1.63 a gallon. And then just last week, we executed the September hedge, and I'll just provide those results to you now. We purchased 2.9 million gallons. J. Aaron was the winning bidder at $1.5975 per gallon. So sure.
Mr. Chairman, am I correct that 50% of our fuel is hedged at any given time?
That is correct.
No more than 50%.
So that is correct. So just to remind everybody, our goal with the fuel hedge program is to hedge approximately 50% of our volume for 12 months with declining hedge amounts out to the 24th month. So that's the farthest out we go. So for any 12-month period, we've got some budgetary certainty with respect to half of our ULSD fuel needs. Okay. Any other questions on Finance Watch?
Okay. Next, we have MTA headquarter and all agency items, and there are 2 action items. The first being the selection of bond underwriters. Pat, you want to talk about that?
Sure.
Okay.
The selection of bond underwriters begins on page 34 of your committee materials this month. We are seeking board authority to qualify firms for underwriting assignments on MTA, including affiliates and subsidiaries bond issues and note issues in connection with the MTA finance portion of approved capital programs, as well as for financing of special projects outside of approved capital programs, as set forth below. We're seeking authority to approve multiple pools, 4 in total. The senior manager pool of 7 firms, a pool of 5 underwriters, including 1 joint venture to serve as senior co-managers, a pool of 16 underwriters to serve as co-managers, and a pool of 24 underwriters to serve as selling group members. And I would just direct your attention to page 3 of the staff summary, where we lay out the names of the firms. And as you can see, for the senior manager bracket, it includes Goldman Sachs and Company, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Ramirez and Company, Wells Fargo Securities. And with respect to Wells Fargo, please note the footnote. The responsibility review relating to Wells Fargo Securities pursuant to the MTA Headquarters Financial Institution and Energy Supplier Responsibility Guidelines has not been completed because of the recent review of recent developments that have been reported in the press remains an ongoing matter. The approval of Wells Fargo Securities is contingent on a finding pursuant to those guidelines that Wells Fargo Securities is responsible. Until such time, we will not be using Wells Fargo securities for any future underwritings on MTA.
And let me also add, we're going to continue to gather the facts for the responsibility review. If we're able to reach a determination that Wells Fargo is a responsible party, we'll share those facts and our analysis with the board, and we'll bring their selection back to the board for your consideration.
As a separate item.
It's a separate item.
Mr. Ferrer?
Mr. Chairman, Bob, I appreciate that. I just, for the sake of clarity, want to nail this down. Are we saying that if we find that Wells Fargo Securities was not involved in any of these things, then they may be ready to proceed, or Wells Fargo?
I think it depends on what we think is the corporation as well, to look at the overall business of them. They do have separate considerations, but we want to see what actions they take as a corporate, citizen.
I like that answer better. Mr. Chairman, I know we discussed this previously. I find what Wells Fargo has done and the reports of it to be particularly egregious, but we'll withhold any further comment until Finance comes back to us with some specific recommendation that we could vote up or down.
I concur with you, Mr. Ferrer. Obviously, the recent information and news coming out about Wells Fargo is disturbing, at the very least. I find it personally difficult to think that they could pass a responsibility test, but there's a due diligence process that the agency goes through, so I think we should respect the process. But I would be very surprised to see at the next meeting that you would have findings that they meet that threshold, but we'll wait to hear back from you. Does anybody else have any questions?
So just continuing with the staff summary, I'll conclude by noting the other senior managers are Citigroup, Siebert, Cisneros, and Schenck & Co., J.P. Morgan. Turning to the next lower bracket, what we refer to as the senior co-managers, this includes Jefferies, Loop Capital Markets, Morgan Stanley, RBC Capital Markets, and a joint venture of the Williams Capital Group and PNC Capital Markets, which is a joint venture with an MBE firm. I won't read the list of co-managers, but as you can see here, there are 16 firms that will be in the co-manager bracket. Everybody above that will be actually on the cover of an official statement when we issue securities. The final group is selling group members, and as you can see, there's a group of 22 firms in the selling group bracket. Those firms will not appear on the OS. They do not take liability in an underwriting, but they are allowed to place retail orders for bonds, which can be very helpful to their customers and to that firm, as well as they're allowed to get up to 3% of a designation on an institutional order. And again, that's intended to make sure that to the degree that that firm is doing the right thing and reaching out to those institutional accounts, that they can get rewarded for that effort. I'm happy to take questions on the RFP or the process, any of the conclusions or the recommendations.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, sorry. We put obviously a significant amount of importance on the minority and women-owned business enterprises that are part of our selection process, as well as the service-disabled veteran-owned firms that applied. And as you can see, we have in each group representation from MWBE firms in the senior manager group. This includes Ramirez & Company and Siebert, Cisneros, Schenck. In the senior co-manager bracket, it includes the Williams Capital Group. And in the co-manager bracket, it includes Academy Securities, which is certified both as an MBE and as a service-disabled veteran-owned firm, Alamo Capital, a woman-owned firm, Blaylock Beal Van, an MBE firm, Cabrera Capital Markets, an MBE firm, Drexel Hamilton, a service-disabled veteran-owned firm, Rice Financial Products, an MBE firm, and Stern Brothers, a woman-owned firm. We would have liked to have seen a better, more women-owned firms applying, but as we talked about in the last cycle, there just aren't that many women-owned firms out there, but we're doing our part to give them opportunities, particularly those firms in the co-manager group can cycle up to the special co-senior role One, to get better exposure to the MTA and the way we run our financing program, but two, also to compensate them and to give them those opportunities that will hopefully grow their firm and make them eligible for elevation in the future, in future processes. Over the past 3-year underwriting cycle, we've worked hard to make sure that our assignments have reflected the diversity of the group that we have, and I would just note that over that period, we have met the goals for women and minority-owned firms, as well as service-disabled veteran-owned firms. We are one of the strongest out there in the state in terms of meeting our goals and making sure we're utilizing a very diverse group of underwriters in our financings.
Mr. Chairman? Yes. Mr. Paley?
Could you explain, based upon where someone is on what list,
Sure.
how the fees differentiate based on which list you're on?
Sure. In any underwriting, the book running senior manager is going to be the highest compensated of all the underwriters, and they generally they take approximately 45 to 50% of the compensation, the total takedown, if you will, that applicable to a financing
Of the pot?
of that pie for
Right.
that particular deal.
Okay.
And that's category run. And so as we rotate those firms, each firm gets a shot at running the books and gets in that position of a book running senior manager. Also on those financings, we look to the next two pools of firms, either the senior co-manager now or the co-manager, and those firms will be able to be cycled up to the special co-senior role, where we have carved out, typically, particularly since the goals were increased a little over a year ago, 15% of the compensation to go to those firms that are at that level. And we always try to include a disabled veteran-owned firm and a minority or woman-owned firm as part of that mix. So on the top row of an official statement, you'll see the book-running senior manager, but you'll also see the two names likely of those other managers that have been promoted up for that financing. That leaves approximately 65 to 70% of the compensation that would be dispersed among the rest of the group of managers. And it's so what we've said to the investor is, if you buy a bond, your direction of the takedown must first consider the book running senior manager at 45%. Next, it must consider those special co-seniors at the percentages that we've identified, and we're always looking at that to make sure that we're going to meet our goals. And then we'll say, and you must designate at least two other firms, for example, to be compensated, and they can pick among this large list of firms to do that.
Okay, so Mike,
Except in the case of the
Okay.
selling group members where it's only 3%.
you have to remember you're talking to a layman,
Okay.
probably worse than a layman, okay? Unlike some other people on this board. What does if the last two entities are designated by somebody,
Okay.
okay, what do they do for their designation, other than be on the list?
That's a great question. And the way I'd answer that is, and we don't always know.
Okay.
What I would say is that, and the feedback we've gotten is that those firms have a sales force, and they're calling on investors that would be likely candidates to buy a particular bond.
Most likely individual investors?
No,
Or-
they would be, here we're thinking about the big institutions, the
Okay.
mutual funds, the insurance companies.
Okay.
The institutions that would come in and place large orders for bonds.
Unlike individuals who might purchase a bond through their individual investment firm.
Right.
But that would be an individual investor at we would assume, a significantly lower number than the
Correct.
institutional investor.
That's correct. In
Okay.
fact, and just to pick up on that point,
Okay.
and because it's an important point that you made, what we call a retail investor, just an average person on the street, might want to buy, 10,000 bonds
Right.
or 50,000 bonds. the firm that they place their order with is going to get the full compensation for that order, and whether they're, no matter which bracket they're in. And that's why we do always place a lot of importance on the retail order period, where any firm can place orders for bonds or notes, and we allow up to 50% of a particular maturity to go to the retail customer. We offer those same bonds the next day to the institutional investor. Now when we're offering bonds for the institutional investor, if a firm that gets that designation you're asking about, why do they get that? They're getting it because ostensibly their sales force is making inroads and providing service to the institution, such that the institution might say, well, I'm going to put my order in through the book runner, but you guys have really done a good job covering me. You've done a good job providing me with analytics on the market, on the MTA, whatever the case may be, and so I'm going to designate you, X percent to reward you for that effort. And we do track that. We monitor that. Our view of the designations is that those discretionary designations are important. They're an important signpost of firms that are making an effort to call on those accounts that are actually buying our bonds.
So at the end of the day, when it's all done,
Right.
we, meaning we or you, know exactly who got paid and how much and who didn't get paid.
That's correct.
So
That's
in
correct.
the end, you can track that. I don't want to use the words fairness and equity, although I'd like to use those words, but you can see that with regard to the trend that happens over a period of time and over a subsequent series of financing entities to determine what is happening in the market.
That certainly with respect to our syndicate, absolutely. It gives us a sense of firms that are, as I said, really making an effort, to call on those accounts that they may not get the order, but the designation signals they're doing something, hopefully on our transaction,
Right.
that's getting rewarded through that designation.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Any other questions or
Patrick,
comments?
I just have two questions. One, in terms of these firms, will you be doing a responsibility check on everyone, or you're just doing it on the managers? How deep do you go in terms of conducting a responsibility check?
Sure. Every firm that proposed in response to the RFP was issued in March. Every firm has undergone a full responsibility review, and we work with our procurement and our legal department to do that.
So they've been completed, or they're going to get started?
They have all been completed, and we noted the Wells Fargo remains outstanding because of the late development and this late information that we're getting with respect to their conduct.
Okay, and I just want to follow up with something that Mr. Paley asked you, just to make sure I didn't misunderstand anything. The senior managers, do they get to pick the remainder of the team when they go out there? Who picks which senior co-managers on each individual deal?
My department does that.
You pick them.
We do
So
that.
you make sure you have diversity there.
That's
and we're
right.
meeting
Right.
all our goals. And
Correct, and we want to make sure that we keep track of who's had an opportunity to be cycled up into that role, and so we do that.
to the agent. Great. Does anybody else have any other questions? Mr. Ferrer?
Not on this, but on a related thing. Late last year, for Bob Foran, we had discussed reopening the financial advisor bidding. And you indicated it would be September. This is September. Where are we?
Good question. The RFP for municipal advisor and swap advisor is out on the street. Proposals are due, I don't have the exact date, I want to say we're in the mid-October timeframe. Part of the reason for having the responses due after today and after the board meets on Wednesday, in fact, is for a firm that may not like the position that they got today in the underwriter bracket, they would have time to submit a proposal as municipal advisor. Many of these firms are registered with the MSRB and the SEC as municipal advisors, and we didn't want to preclude a firm from saying, you know, I'd rather not be a co-manager or whatever role they have, I'd rather apply to be your advisor, and this gives them that opportunity.
So we'll see something at the end of the year.
It's my hope to bring something to the board in either November or December at the latest, for both municipal advisor and swap advisor role.
Bob, let me just ask you one other question before I make a motion to approve. Since all these other firms have been vetted and they've passed the responsibility check, with the exception right now Wells Fargo due to the recent information, would it make more sense to pull Wells Fargo out until the responsibility check is completed? We can always come back at the next meeting and vote to approve them, as opposed to approving them contingent on you coming back. I'm just thinking it might be a little cleaner to approve everybody that's passed the responsibility check and then come back at the next meeting, whether or not they have or have not.
Yeah. We're effectively doing that the way we have it positioned now, because they will not participate in any way, shape, or form in any financing that we'll do pursuant to this RFP. So we could take them out, but it really is accomplishing the same thing. They're there, but they are not going to do any financings for us pursuant to this RFP until we're comfortable with the responsibility review and we bring it back to the board. So the board will make that decision.
Okay. All right, then can I get a motion to approve? Second? All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, we have another action item. We are seeking board approval for the resolution to authorize the execution, filing, and acceptance of federal funds for the federal fiscal year 2016 and 2017 by the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer or any of his designees. That language can be found on page 40. So we need a motion on that.
We have a motion? Second. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Okay, now we're going to move to report and information items. There are three of those items, the first being the contract change order report for the second quarter of 2016, which can be found on page 48. Included is also the capital contract change order, which is also reported to the CPOC committee. Any questions on that? Okay, next item is a draft of the Independent Accountant's Review Report of MTA financial statements for the 3 months ended June 30th, 2016. It will be presented and voted on today at the Audit Committee meeting. The report is in the exhibit book and can also be found on the MTA website at mta.info. A third item, and it's what we do in September and October, we don't have materials for it, but we include on the agenda the 2017 preliminary budget July financial plan, just to allow the public the opportunity to opine, or, we put them on the agenda so they can address any issue they may have. So that also is on today's agenda. That concludes those information items. So next we're going to move to procurements. Angel Barbosa is here.
Thank you, Doug. For headquarters, there are 6 procurements for a grand total of $4.278 billion. One is a non-competitive procurement for a total of $933,000, and 5 are competitive procurements for a total of $4.277 billion. In these particular procurements, one of them is for the medical benefits program, RFP or contract, that we're proposing awarding to Aetna. That's for New York City Transit represented employees and retirees and dependents. Chairman?
Do we have any questions? Can I have a motion to approve? Second? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, on to the next item.
Okay. We're going to move to The next item on the agenda from Metro North, there's an action item requesting that the MTA Board approve a resolution authorizing increases proposed by the Connecticut Department of Transportation to Metro North on New Haven Line fares for travel to and from Connecticut Station. That proposal would be an increase of an average of 6%, which includes the previously approved 1% fare increase, so that's a net 5% that was scheduled for January 1, 2017. This was done to fund an acquisition of the new M6 rail cars. This increase will be effective on or about December 1st, 2016, and are proposed to help close the CDOT budget shortfall. And we need action on that. Any questions on that? We have a question. Mr. Jones?
Is there any public hearings that take place, either Connecticut or in New York, on this issue?
Is there somebody here from Metro North? I believe that there are public hearings in Connecticut.
Yes, Metro North actually asked the board's permission to participate with the state of Connecticut. There were 3 separate public hearings. They're in the meeting notes and everything else, and that information has come back, as well as the Title VI that had to be done on it.
Oh, what did I say? M8, I apologize. Question.
There was a good deal of discussion in this morning's Metro North Committee, and I just want to reiterate the comments that I made for the purposes of this committee. I do think that the proposed fare increases are a message to the Connecticut State Legislature that they have to get serious about their funding strategy for both CONDOT and CT Transit. This is the 4th fare increase since 2013. It's a 21% increase over time. After 4 consecutive legislative sessions in Connecticut, they've still not fully addressed their lockbox legislation. Much like we, the members of the MTA Board, have for many years made the case for diversified, sustainable, and long-term funding sources for this agency. The state legislature of Connecticut must do the same and stop balancing the books on the backs of commuters. It certainly impacts New York residents who are commuting into Connecticut. It's a sizable number, I would imagine, considering that we know the largest reverse commute in this country is from New York into Stamford. So we do know that a good deal of New York residents and users of our Metro North system are going to be impacted by this. So I am going to vote no, but I did want to explain the reasons as I did in the earlier committee. Thank you.
Any other questions by any board member? If not, can I have a motion to approve? Those in favor? Opposed?
Okay, now we're going to move back to procurements.
Right.
Angel Barbosa.
Thank you, Doug. For Long Island Railroad, there are no items. For New York City Transit and MTA bus operations, there are 2 procurements for a total of $4.5 million. One is a non-competitive multi-agency miscellaneous service procurement for additional 3-year extension modification for continued maintenance of the local and wide area network equipment originally manufactured by Nortel Networks, Incorporated, for a total of $2.76 million. One competitive procurement for a modification to extend the contract for an additional 3 years for continued use of the Constructware web-based project management system for a total of $1.76 million. Chairman?
Any questions? Motion? Second? Great. Thank you. I don't know if I could second it. All those in favor? Opposed? Next.
Next up is Bridges and Tunnels. There is 1 competitive procurement for the modification of 14 personal service contracts for additional funding and for inspection and design, expert engineering, and engineering support services on an as-needed basis for a grand total of $12 million.
Okay. Any questions by any board member? Motion? Second? We got Mitch. All those in favor? Opposed?
That concludes procurements. Thank you.
In our consolidated reports, we have results again, June and July results against the mid-year forecasts. We also show the 12-month allocation of the mid-year forecast, and that's the basis by which we will be reporting actuals for basically the remainder of 2016. That being said, Jeff would be next with real estate.
Thanks, Doug. Hi, everybody. We have 6 action items for your approval this month, each the subject of a detailed staff summary in your materials. I'd be glad to take questions about any of them, but otherwise would ask for your approval. I'd just like to highlight the proposed agreement with the Hyatt. This is by way of implementing the first step of a very ambitious program of improvements at Grand Central that we've arranged to be funded and implemented by the developer of One Vanderbilt. You may recall that the one piece that we reserved for ourselves was responsibility for acquisition of the site. This is back in January you approved our beginning process of condemnation. I'd just like to take this opportunity to note that our negotiating team led by Tony Szymanczyk, I think has done a really good job with this. We come back to you when we have proposed settlements. It's a good thing when we have a proposed settlement. It means we haven't had to go through eminent domain, and I think we've got a very good result here.
Any questions?
Question on the Penn Station one?
Sure.
The point here is ESD and MTA are going to pay, and hopefully we can convince Amtrak to pay its share, but that is not guaranteed.
That's correct.
And if they don't pay, we in ESD continue to pay what we paid, because there's no penalty if Amtrak doesn't pay.
Well, in effect, that's the status quo for ESD as we speak. I mean,
Right.
This is initiative largely driven by us, and it's to do with transaction costs, relating to a process that's been ongoing with ESD.
Right. Now, one would assume that Amtrak, as the owner of the spot, would be as interested in its renovation as we are, but I would leave that to other discussions. It's their building, and we're paying for it. Now, I understand we get benefits. I'm not arguing we don't get benefits, and I'm not arguing the state of New York doesn't get benefits. But in addition to that, Amtrak gets substantial benefits, and one would think they would be a party to the negotiation, or at least an agreement to at least pay some of the initial consulting and engineering concerns, which is what we're paying for. One would think.
Mr. Murtha, you have a question?
Has 347 been executed yet, the sale or lease?
Well, as you know, Chuck, the process there is to go through land use review, and we are working on our pre-lease agreement with the designated developer and anticipate inking that soon and starting the land use process. But the closing on the lease will not occur until we're through the land use process, and the environmental review will be back to you with secret findings. It's a complex development, and we're in planned development, and I think we're more or less on schedule. We had always expected to do that, mid to late next year.
Can I have a motion? Second. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay. Now we need a motion for the Finance Committee to adjourn. Can I have a motion? Second. Finance Committee is adjourned. Thank you. Maybe I broke the record.